Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers with me, Murray, your weekly fix of 10 minutes of ancient warfare-related ranting and raving to take you away from whatever's happening in the real world to think about ancient warfare. Who wouldn't want to spend all day doing that? I think I've calculated that this is about number 210 of these, so currently, whatever that is minutes-wise, but you can certainly listen to me for 210 days in a row, for 10 minutes at least. Or if you want to put that, what is that, 2,100 minutes, 2,000, yeah, about that. Lots of minutes of me talking. What I do here, of course, is I answer a question posed by a reader, listener, or viewer. You can send me a question however you like. You can send me a postcard or a letter. You can send an email. In fact, you can send an email to sort of anyone associated with any of the magazines. They just forward them to me. You can, of course, comment on a previous video or podcast. They also get sent to me if I don't notice them. So that's how we work. I've got a couple of questions today, which we'll get to. The first is from Dan. I'm going to say Dan because his username is Sexy Dan Hobbyhorse. So I'm not sure that they want that publicized. Apologies, Dan. Anyway, Dan asks, may I submit an AWA for Uncle Murray here? Uncle Murray, lovely. Yes, indeed you can. What did legionaries drink on campaign? Aside from the obvious water and wine. Well, water and wine. More water, less wine. We'll get to that. Did they have flavoured cordials or plain water? Did they start their day with hot drink and end with something cold like we drink coffee and beer? Do we know of water rations? And can we infer if the legions were particularly hydrated or not? Thanks, Dan. Okay, well, the reality is water. And I imagine on duty it's water. You're not going to be given permission really to drink wine or beer if you're serving. There's all sorts of issues, of course, with how do they get the water, and our sources aren't particularly clear on that because, you know, the amount of weight that would require an individual to carry with them on campaign is quite substantial, and therefore to actually take that amount of water would be majorly problematic for every individual. So 30 pounds of water, 15 kilos of water a day, you know, when you're all sort of out in the field and marching, and that's just men as opposed to horses and other things. So I read somewhere, I think it's in Xenophon, that there was 3 days, but I think that's rations, not water. Generally speaking, an army on campaign is going to be finding water through rivers and lakes that they come across. We do get some evidence, for instance, in the Judean campaign under Vespasian of the transportation of water sort of in a vast train of mules that brings amphora of water to be stored, and you know the actual logistics of it all is ridiculous. And in terms of how many men are going to be required to get the water for the army, we do have several occasions where armies are running out of water. The miracle of the rain, for instance, in about 174 AD, Marcus Aurelius chases the Quadi back across the Danube. They then get surrounded by the Quadi, who don't attack and just sit there waiting, knowing that the Romans don't have water with them. So if you think about some of the advances of Roman armies in flying columns as opposed to well-stocked logistics trains being able to keep up with the army, all of that's very, you know, you can easily trap them without getting water if you know that they're going to be pursuing you light, for instance. We also get sort of the idea that the army of Alexander the Great, for instance, the Battle of Gaugamela, one of the reasons for where just north of Nineveh, I think Mosul today, one of the reasons that Darius wants to fight the battle there is that there's no water supply for the Macedonian army. He's had to fill it up from nearby rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, and then fight. So in that sense, is there a train and, you know, wagons and mules and all that sort of thing that's carrying the water? With Romans, are they getting water supply in their camp? Generally, as one of the rules, and I think I wrote about this way back in Ancient Warfare 1.1 about the siting of Roman camps. And one of the rules about siting a Roman camp is it's got to be close to a water supply and a wood supply. So in that sense, there's always thinking going into where's the water coming from rather than trapping yourself not close to a water supply. We've got several battles where you've got men foraging on riverbanks, so they're not just foraging for food. They're filling water containers. Probably are units filling water containers for the rest of a legion or the rest of a section of the army. That's probably a duty that is rotated amongst various different groups. But what we have in several cases is where both armies are sending men to the same section of the same river, and that they start to skirmish, and that skirmish escalates into a battle. And if you think about that, it would be quite easy to send your men to the river, and they wouldn't necessarily end up in exactly the same spot as men from the other side. So you could actually have two units from two opposing armies watering in the same river at the same time, but not be close enough that it would actually lead to an escalation. So that's the case. One of the things, of course, about, if you think about Alexander the Great's battles, two of them, Granicus and Issus, are fought over a river crossing, which, of course, is not only an interesting defensible position, although in both cases the Persians don't succeed in using it as such, but, of course, it's also close to being a water supply for the army to drink following the battle. The invasion of Britain in 43 and even Caesar's invasion in 55 BC, close to water supplies. And Caesar's one of the only sources that really gives attention to supplies and gathering in supplies. He doesn't specifically mention water, but I think that it's essentially implied in his whole they secured supplies, they secured supplies, they secured supplies. That's not just fodder and forage, that's water as well. Probably when you're in friendly enemy territory, you are requesting containers of water that are already gathered, for instance, and even if you're in enemy territory, you're perhaps forcibly taking said containers from populations. If you think about a soldier going into actual battle, they're probably not going to be taking water containers with them, or if they are, they're going to be relatively small. That miracle of the rain that we hear about, the description we get in Dio Cassius is of the soldiers turning their helmets upside down to catch the water and then drink it as they fight, or even their upturned shields, I think. So in that sense, it's not like they've got water containers with them to fill up. So it's probably a case of, drink up, boys, we're off to fight a battle, leave everything here, go, just the necessary equipment to fight, and off we go. As far as I know, you don't get any accounts of anyone getting the stitch from, over drinking and then going and overexerting themselves. But they probably didn't survive, so we wouldn't find out about that. So you get all sorts of interesting parallels and allegories, but we don't get a lot of really direct evidence. One set of direct evidence we do get, though, is, for instance, in Belisarius's invasion of North Africa in the 6th century. We get mention in Procopius that they put all of the water they're going to need on the ships, and they sail those ships from Constantinople down to Sicily, and then from Sicily they cross over into North Africa. But what we get in Procopius's books on the Vandalic Wars is the idea that they set out from Methone on the Peloponnesian coast, they reach the harbour of Zakynthus, and from there they cross the Adriatic. It's the 16th day of sailing. They come to a deserted place in Sicily, and while they're there, they discover that their entire supply of water for the whole fleet has been spoiled, except that of Belisarius himself and his table companions. So in that sense, you've got that really interesting insight that Belisarius in that invasion was taking enough water on his ships for the entire sea voyage, wasn't expecting to be able to replenish that water until he got to Africa. And again, when they land, they're landing near water sources, and several of the locations of Belisarius's march are water source locations. And we hear a lot in Procopius and even Ammianus earlier about springs and things like that being where you would go, which makes perfect sense. And of course, because you can't carry vast amounts of water, no taps, no pipes or anything like that, you've got these supplies of water. We do know, for instance, from Josephus again, that there are at Masada, there's a massive reservoir for rainwater, which could be, plundered anywhere else that had a similar cistern system. That's tricky. You could easily fill your water supplies from that and then move on. We know, of course, that not only Rome and other cities, but cities like Jerusalem have conduits and aqueducts to supply them with water from nearby water sources. And so, in that sense, I think you've got a really complex way of supplying your army with a very limited amount of water, sort of in terms of the short term. Like essentially you have to replenish it every day because you're not going to be able to carry vast amounts of water on the march with you. The exception to that, of course, is what Belisarius is doing, but you assume that he's planning to replenish it when he gets to North Africa. We don't hear that he refills in Sicily, but his entire water supply for his fleet's spoiled. So obviously they have to, but very often our sources are silent on that, what must be a necessity. It's not like you can basically sail on from Sicily to North Africa and go, well, sorry, our water's spoiled, make do. You're like, Whoa. And there's a really interesting thing with the water that Belisarius has that doesn't spoil. And Procopius goes into a detail saying, this alone was preserved by the wife of Belisarius in the following manner. She filled with water jars made of glass and constructed a small room with planks to hold in the hold of the ship, where it was impossible for the sun to penetrate. And there she sank the jars in sand, and by this means the water remained unaffected. So maybe it was in some sort of algae that, the sunlight hitting the other jars, presumably clay, heated it up or something like that and caused an algal bloom. I'm not sure. I don't know that anyone's written about that, but maybe like that. But the ones that she sinks in sand in the dark don't have the problem that the other water has. So there's lots of really interesting sort of anecdotal bits and pieces about water systems and how armies remain supplied with water. Very often we don't hear about it in the positive, we only hear about it in the negative. We only hear about it when it goes wrong, rather than when it's going right. Or we have to read between the lines. If it says fodder and forage, read water too, not just food supplies. So I hope, Dan, that answers your question, and you can join me again for another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers. Thanks. Bye.